Hey everybody, welcome to a new edition of Philly Film Brothers. I am Chris Pierdomenico of DorkDaily.com.
And I'm Dave Pierdomenico of a different universe entirely, Halloween year-round.
Yeah, you're a spin-off of my site, but kind of.
Not a spin-off, a multiverse. Let's keep it thematically consistent here.
Sure. So we last night we got a chance to see Spider-Man: No Way Home, and I just for the record, this is going to be a spoiler review. So I want to talk about honestly, I haven't stopped thinking about this film since I saw it, and I got so much I want to talk about.
It's tough not to.
Yeah,
and honestly, if you're on YouTube already, spoilers are like literally. People are filming scenes in the theater and posting them on YouTube. I watched like 5 today.
Literally.
So if you're on YouTube anyway, it's been spoiled.
Right. So, it was fitting before my wife and I went to go see the movie yesterday. I said we really should watch like all of the original films, and we both had seen the Homecoming and Far From Home more recently, but it had been a while since I watched the Raimi trilogy, and I never had even seen the Amazing Spider-Man 1. I saw Amazing Spider-Man 2. I liked it.
You hadn't actually seen that one before?
I'd not seen because my feeling on it was that when it came out in 2012, I'm like, I just saw this movie 10 years ago. I don't want to see a redo, but I actually wound up enjoying it quite a bit. I mean, it was different. And I think, so many things to say about this movie, but this was pretty much Spider-Man Endgame. This was like Spider-Man Endgame.
Very
level.
Much. It was his crossover special. And I'm glad, I went back, I marathoned everything. I even rewatched the Venom movies and Spider-Verse just because I'm very committed. But it definitely felt like it's weird. It's like you have to look at this movie as an MCU movie, as just a regular Spider-Man movie, and as a big crossover event. And I think that, on that last one, I never would have thought it gave, and I'll get more into this later, but it gave closure to 2 other franchises that I never thought we'd ever get closure to, where the last we saw of them, we're like, well, that's just where it ended because Sony rebooted it.
Right. No, I felt like it was a love letter to Spider-Man on the silver screen. It was a love letter to the first 2 franchises that we saw, the first 2 iterations of Spider-Man, because, I think sometimes when there was, maybe the initial reaction when there was a reboot was like, you can forget about, the stuff from last time. This is like the authentic Spider-Man now. But,
and it's like, no, they still exist.
Yeah.
And to a crazy fan like me who obsesses over things like continuity, don't get me started on like the MCU's continuity problem, like with language and all that. But it somehow keeps all that intact.
Yeah, there were a few things I noticed that were kind of off. And again, I want to put out there, this is a spoiler review. Again, this is a spoiler review. Stop listening if you haven't seen it yet.
So can we break the ice and just talk about the 3 Spider-Mans?
3 Spider-Man. Where you're
They're in
pointing at each other.
Everybody at Thanksgiving, my fiance's cousin was like, dude, they're not going to be in it. They're not going to be in it. I'm like, yes, they are. Don't say that. Yes, they are. Well, now I'm going to rub it in his face. Yes, they were.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was radically cool. Like it worked really well. And it's funny because, I mean, all 3 of those characters were created not, they weren't meant to cross over with each other, but it worked. And you really, and Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire, I mean, they really feel like it's them. It doesn't feel like, it was, like a cheap cameo to bring them in, but they're like, pivotal parts of the story.
They have their own arcs, and I think it's almost because they were each such different iterations that they work so well together. Like,
yeah, that's exactly what it was.
Toby is still adorably awkward.
Yeah.
Garfield is still kind of sarcastic, kind of too cool for Spider-Man, but it works here because he's the only one that is.
Yeah. Yeah, and Tom Holland is just like he's the younger version. I mean, it's as much as the hype about the two other Spider-Men. I mean, this is Tom Holland's movie. I mean, this is definitely Tom Holland's movie, and I would say his best performance as Spider-Man is in this
definitely
movie. You know, and that's saying a lot.
I think that he's done very well. I have, and I'll be honest, I've always kind of taken a little bit of issue with the MCU Spider. Like, I love Homecoming, I love Far From Home. They're fun movies, but I always felt like part of me was like, well, it's not really Spider-Man. It's too MCU. It's too. But this movie was pure Spider-Man. This was, this was him stripped of everything, and just Spider-Man was always like the working class superhero. Batman's a billionaire, Iron Man's a billionaire, Superman's like, an alien god with superpowers, Wonder Woman's the daughter of Zeus, and Spider-Man was the only superhero that struggled with money, that dealt with being broke.
Rent.
That's exactly. And this movie took away all the Stark tech. It took away all the stuff he had. And it just
not completely.
It put him through the ringer.
Well, that's where he winds up for sure. But it also uses the Stark tech in a very interesting way, saying, "Hey, you know what? It was funny. I was just saying to my wife, we were talking about the villains of the Spider-Man movie because we were watching all of them, and they all are so tragic. Like all the Spider-Man villains are so tragic because most of the time, and the villains we saw in this movie, they didn't want." They were trying to do something good, or it was something they didn't choose or anything. And so I thought it was a really interesting angle, which I honestly didn't see coming. Like, oh, why don't we try to heal them?
Yeah, it humanized them in a way. Now, going into this, I thought they might, because Doc Ock I thought was very well humanized in Spider-Man 2, but they give that same treatment to everyone. And you're right, they were scientists that were trying to do something profound. Or, much like probably one of my favorite lines in the movie that Jamie Foxx says, they were just people that didn't watch where they fell.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Electro and Sandman, they just fell into stuff.
You gotta watch where you step.
Yeah.
That was so good. This was one of those movies where it did everything I wanted it to do. Like, the conversations between the villains that I would want, even I didn't know I would want that conversation, but that was such a great conversation. All of the conversations between the three Spider-Men was exactly what I wanted. I mean, they really, it was made with it was a love letter to the franchise, and it felt like it really understood the fans. Really understood.
I'm just going to say it now. This movie, miles better than Endgame, and I'll tell you why.
Really? Okay, that's pretty bold.
Endgame has the big over-the-top moment with all the portals opening and all the heroes come through, and it's like, oh my god, it's every single character over the last 10 years. But it feels... Now, I know we talked about this in our Endgame video.
You remember our Endgame video? I don't.
I do. Marvel, to their credit, had spent 10 years building the foundation to earn that level of fan service.
Mm-hmm.
This movie did a better job of its fan service without having to do that, because this movie was building its foundation without even realizing that it was since 2002. It didn't need the big over-the-top moment of everyone coming through just to see how cool it looked. It didn't need that. It was the subtle moments that made it spectacular. It was those little conversations between the Spider-Men, between the villains that made it, that just brought everything together, where you're like, it'd be cool to see them all in a big battle, which we get, but I found myself enjoying just them hanging out at Happy's apartment.
Yeah. Because you forget, how many great actors are in this franchise across every iteration.
Yeah, and and these are villains that we never thought we'd see together. And I love how the ones from the same universe know about each other.
Yeah, they read.
Though I will question this. How does Doc Ock know that the Green Goblin was Norman Osborn when Bernard covered it up and not even Harry knew?
Yeah, there are a few holes.
I don't think that was public knowledge.
No, it was not
in the
public
Raimi
knowledge.
Universe.
No. Well, then you ask, how did Harry? Didn't Harry? We just saw Spider-Man 3 recently. Harry becomes the Green Goblin. He didn't put together the Green Goblin tried to kill him and his girlfriend in the first movie.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Also, I love how I feel bad because, poor Harry and, Topher Grace and weird emo Goblin from Amazing Spider-Man 2. They're just sitting there like, where's our portal? They were like the Netflix Marvel heroes in Endgame, being like, any minute now. Come on, Jessica Jones, Daredevil,
hey,
Luke Cage.
I did not really watch the Netflix Marvel shows, but boy, they really pleased the fans of that franchise, of the Daredevil franchise.
They did. They did. I did. That was a nice touch. I like to think that for some people, that was more exciting than the 3 Spider-Mans.
Yeah, no, I think it was. For sure. For certain
just like,
Marvel
oh my
fans.
God, it is canon.
Yeah. Which, hey, that's great. But, the small moments, subtle moments, there was a lot that I picked out. I don't know about you, but kind of what stood out for me was when... well, first of all, that Tobey Maguire's character is like the biggest person on forgiveness, and the way when he sees Flint Marko again, and we know where they last left off, where Tobey forgave him. But he's like, come on, Flint, we're going to get you home. Like, you can tell, like, he really has forgiven him. Like, he's very wise now, and like very emotionally mature. But just...
And I was glad to hear that he did work things out with MJ after his weird jazz routine.
Yeah, weird emo phase. We've all had that.
The only thing, I was a little disappointed they didn't do that dance. That would have been amazing.
Yeah, he did. They were talking about all their weird experiences, like, oh, I went to space. Oh, I fought a rhino guy. He didn't say, oh, I went emo for a week and started just acting like.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, it didn't stand out. But like little moments like that when Electro says to Andrew Garfield's character, says, "Oh, great, now I'm a nobody again," and because I think why it works so well, because there was a lot of talk of Spider-Man movies in the past that have had a bunch of villains have kind of traditionally not been the best Spider-Man movies. Spider-Man
and this
movies.
one had the most.
This one had the most.
Best.
It's one of the best, and I think the reason for that is that we know all their backstories. I heard another reviewer say this was kind of like the villains' Avengers in some way, or
kind of. And what worked about it is Marvel and Sony and John Watts were smart enough to know we don't need a new villain for this movie.
Yeah.
Just let the one, and of course, while we're on the subject, we have to, there was still kind of a major villain, and it was kind of fitting. We got to talk about Willem Dafoe.
Oh, yes.
And the fact that the Spider-Man franchise finally realized he is so much scarier without the mask. He is so creepy.
Yeah. I was delighted when he shows up, and he's kind of in, he's in the original suit that we know him from, but then when he starts talking to the mask again, it's like, oh my gosh, like we're continuing this story. And you think like, and that's kind of the trouble with some maybe early superhero movies, is that it's, they kill off the villain. And I understand thematically where that would make sense, but it's great with the multiverse now that you don't have to worry about that anymore.
I like to think that they all got their happy endings when they went back.
I guess so. I mean, one thing that I kind of wanted to see in this that I probably was too expensive, but I kind of wanted to see like a glimpse of each of their worlds when they went back or something, like just like a quick like shot or something.
That would have been interesting.
That would have been interesting, but it wasn't necessary. But I think it would have been cool.
Like you cut back to Toby and then cameo by Kirsten Dunst.
Right.
And they're living in a house now, but it's still owned by Mr. Ditkovich. Like he is just perpetually Peter's landlord.
Yeah, yeah.
Or maybe the tables have turned and Peter owns the building now and he goes, rent, Mr. Ditkovich.
See, that's the other thing is they could have, they leaned, it was self-aware just enough. It wasn't too self-aware that it was like silly and kind of not believable, but it was
they could have gone further with it.
But it was just
I'm
right
something
amount.
of a scientist myself.
Oh my god, I applauded in the theater when he like I just thought
that worked. you had to do with great power comes great, because at this point it's no longer about this. The Amazing Spider-Man movie. One of the funniest things about the movie was how hard they try to have Martin Sheen give that speech without saying those words.
Yeah.
So
I know.
It involves him beating around the bush so much that if you have the power to do good things, then you are morally obligated to do those good things. And it's just like...
It's like they had
a
thesaurus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this movie realized that, no, you could just say it.
Right. And it works because it wasn't done as it was seen as like, oh, it was the way of connecting him with the other Spider-Men, because they all had that moment. And one of the complaints of I shouldn't say complaints, but like some of the, I don't complain, but some people complain like, oh, the Tom Holland Spider-Man, didn't have the Uncle Ben moment. We didn't meet Uncle Ben. And they said, well,
he does now.
Iron Man was kind of like Uncle Ben. I could kind of see that a little bit, but I like that they switched it up a little bit, and that this Tom Holland has this tragedy now that motivates him. So it works, and I think when he's looking up to Toby and Andrew, it's just really just so many good scenes in this, and that's the thing. I was so entertained the entire time. There's not many movies I can say that about. I would say this and
it was.
This was probably my favorite movie of the year. My favorite comic book movie for sure. But I would say
it's up there.
I would say that and The Suicide Squad would be the top two for me this year.
That is hard to pick. I love them both.
Yeah, I was very entertained the entire time, and I kind of felt the same way about The Suicide Squad. Is that I felt entertained constantly, and that's such a hard thing to do. I think in a film,
not just entertaining, but a lot of heart, just like The Suicide Squad.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. But I'm saying
I challenge anyone to see this movie and still have dry eyes when Andrew Garfield saves MJ. Looking at him and what that means to him, and that even though that wasn't something he needed redemption for, but it's something that he believed he needed redemption for.
Yeah. No, that was maybe one of the best Spider-Man movie moments of all time, I would say. Just and Garfield plays it so well. That's the thing, is everybody just did a phenomenal job on this.
It's funny. I did not initially really like him as Spider-Man when those movies came out, and I almost think that this movie makes me appreciate him more. Well,
you know what? I think it's Vicky's favorite Spider-Man.
Really? That's interesting.
She really liked him.
It's always gonna be Toby for me, but
sure.
That might just be, he was my Spider-Man. I was in middle school when that movie came out, so the Raimi trilogy is always going to be my favorite. Sure.
Yeah, I like all of them. They're all that's the thing. They're all different. I after watching them all again and watching Amazing Spider-Man for the first time, I'm like, they all have, the myth is so fascinating, and how they tell the myth differently, I think, is really cool. because you kind of there's certain staples you look for, like the Uncle Ben or Aunt May dying, and Flash is a douchebag in some way, and it's so funny. Like you look at the Flash from the Raimi trilogy versus the Flash in the MCU, very different, but still they're douchebags.
Still bullies. But it was interesting how the Raimi one is just your typical classic cliche jock bully, and the MCU one kind of shows like toxic nerd culture.
Yeah, right. And even
He's
in
like
in this one, I love that they included him in this one. Like he wrote the book about being Spider-Man's best friend.
And what was that book called?
Flashpoint. I know. Yeah,
which has to be a reference. That had to be a nod to DC's Flashpoint, because they're basically going to do the same movie with Flash, but like all the different Batmans.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is that DC is a comic that the MCU characters read, apparently, as we know from Eternals.
And the Raimi Spider-Man movie. Remember, you do too much, you're not Superman,
Right.
So DC does exist in the Marvel Universe, which is very interesting.
I wonder if the opposite is true. I wonder if in DC, if they read Spider-Man comics or something, or Iron Man.
I don't know. I think things are too dark and gritty over there for them to have comic books.
But hey, you know what? They play football, and they have late night shows.
They do.
Yeah.
It's funny how Bill Maher exists in the MCU because of Iron Man 3, but Jon Stewart exists in the DCEU because of Batman v Superman.
Is it the Daily Show in that?
I think so.
I really forgot that. I totally forgot he was in that.
Yeah. Watch it again.
Yeah. That is fascinating.
It's seriously underrated.
Yeah, I know.
I say that with my Marvel hoodie on.
Yeah, so this is a tough one to top. I mean, I know they signed Holland for 3 more movies, and honestly, and Twitter is talking today. People really want to see Raimi's Spider-Man 4, and they really want to see Mark Webb's Amazing Spider-Man 3, which I think would be interesting. I would be down for either of those.
I think at this point you could, but I almost, as fun as that would be, I really love, like I said, I loved that this movie gave closure to those characters.
True.
And if we never hear from them again, if we just let this be the last we see of them, I'm okay with their stories ending here, because these are good places for them to end. Yeah,
I think that's a fair point. Maybe if we just got a shot of Tobey Maguire and Kristen Dunst in a later movie or something, like a glimpse, maybe in Multiverse of Madness or something, that'd be cool. But
oh yeah, speaking of that, since when are the post-credit scenes just straight up trailers?
This is the first one.
I know they've always basically been trailers for the next movie. Like, here's a little, but now now
it's literally a trailer.
It's literally a trailer.
Well,
Gone is the pretense that this is not all just marketing and advertising.
Well, they disguised it before. They're like, oh no, this isn't a trailer. This is a bonus scene at the end to tell you what's coming next. But it's a trailer. Literally is just a trailer. So.
It was yeah. It's a cool trailer. I'm excited for that.
It looks great. Yeah. What did you think of the Venom mid-credit scene? Because that was the only part of the movie that I was kind of bummed out about.
On the one hand, I see what they're trying to do. They want to continue doing Tom Hardy Venom movies on his own, but they also want to have Tom Holland fight Venom. So they're like, oh, we'll leave a little bit of the goo behind for that to happen. But it raises some questions. Number one, what was the point of bringing him over there just to send him back? That seems like a wasted opportunity.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Number two, how did he even get pulled in if the whole point was people who knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man got pulled in? He never, in his world, there's no Peter Parker.
And you know who else didn't know was Electro. Did not know that Peter Parker was Spider-Man.
I look at that as when he accessed the grid, he got all the knowledge and information with it.
Or a wizard did it, literally.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a fair point. But yeah, that's it. Right. Well, oh, you know what? You know why? Was because, you know, Toby mentions the Venom symbiote in this movie. He mentions what he went through a little bit. And in Venom 2, they talk about Venom tells Eddie that like there's like a whole hive, like a hive mind. And remember I said that this Venom was aware of the Venom that was in Spider-Man 3. And I think that's why they were brought over.
So you're saying that the Venom movies with Tom Hardy are part of the Raimi universe, you think?
Well, it is now, because we just saw them in the movie with the Raimi characters. I mean, not directly next to each other, but
we don't necessarily know that. We don't know if they came from the Garfield universe.
Who's they? You mean
Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock?
Yeah,
did he come from the Raimi universe, or did he come from the Amazing universe?
He didn't come from either. He came from the Venom universe. It's a different universe.
So he's in a totally separate one.
He's in. What I'm saying is that at the end of Venom 2, Venom says that there's a hive mind of symbiotes, like they all are connected, and so
but only within the same universe.
I don't think so. I think it can be
that can't. It has to be the same universe for the hive mind to work. Otherwise, their mind is crossing the multiverse every second of every day, and that doesn't make sense. But a man with spider powers does.
That does. No, I think it's connected. I think there's a connection between. I still do. Connection between Venom and Spider-Man 3 and Tom Hardy's Venom. It just ended up being a hive mind that all the symbiotes are connected. Maybe even, or maybe they were just suddenly connected once that spell happened or something. Mm-hmm. Like maybe they weren't initially connected, but then we had that crossover.
We do know from the trailers that Morbius is connected to the Venom universe because they mentioned the thing that happened in San Francisco.
Oh, you know what? We see Spider-Man in the Morbius trailer. We see him on a poster.
Yeah.
And people argue that was Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. I think it was a model from one. No, I think it was a model from one of those movies. It was from one of the posters. So that, because I did think that was interesting.
So maybe Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock is in the Raimi universe.
So there's two Eddie Brocks in the Raimi universe?
Oh no, that doesn't make any sense. You're right. Then it's got to be the Amazing universe.
It could be, or again, it could be a completely different universe. It could be one with a Spider-Man we haven't seen yet, because you know. And I really like how the MCU set this up, because they got you ready for it kind of slowly. Like you had the Doctor Strange movie, and then you had they hint at it in Far From Home with Mysterio. Like obviously it turns out to be a lie.
Yeah, then that's a cop out.
But they get you thinking about it, is what I'm saying. They get you thinking about it. And then with Loki on Disney Plus, they get you, they really, because Loki's such an odd character, but they make it seem plausible, this idea of the multiverse. And then I think especially with the What If series, like I think if they had just come out with this multiverse stuff with No Way Home, I think we wouldn't have accepted it as much. I think the audience would not have accepted it as much or as probably easily. Not. And I think it was kind of, they were preparing the audience for it, which I thought was cool.
I also love just with the nature of this, literally every other Marvel property, TV show, movie that ever came before could now just be considered episodes of What If.
Yeah, absolutely.
So looking back at this one, it definitely, it's funny you mentioned Far From Home. This movie actually makes me realize that that's my least favorite of the MCU Spider-Man movies.
Yeah, and that's no poo-pooing, because it's a great movie. I really like Far From Home, but I do like Homecoming, and I do like this one. I mean, this one's my favorite one. But in comparison, I'd say Far From Home is the weaker one.
So where does Spider-Man go from here? He's broke. He's got his tiny little apartment. Nobody knows who he is. Now he's ready to be the working class superhero again.
I don't know how you're going to top this one, honestly. But we said that about Endgame. We're like, how are they going to top Endgame? And they did. I mean, I feel like they did.
By doing what Endgame did, but better.
Yeah, well, Endgame didn't have the multiverse. So yeah, I don't know where you go from here, but but I think the good thing is that you have a lot of possibilities. You have endless possibilities. So I look forward to seeing what they do next. I really want to go see it again because it just was so. I made the mistake of drinking too much soda that night, and I had to go to the bathroom like twice. And I tried to go to the bathroom when there was a scene where I had seen the scene in the trailer.
Is that what you were basing that on?
Yeah, so like when MJ and Ned come in to Doctor Strange's house, like I'm like, oh, I saw this in the trailer, so that's why I ran to the bathroom.
Also, how old are you now?
85.
You're like worried about.
Look at these gray hair, man.
You gotta go right before it starts.
I did. Well, when I drink soda, I'm like Fuller, you know, like Fuller, easy on the Pepsi. Yeah.
No,
yeah, so,
I once really had to pee during Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. That's a long one. It's like 2.5 hours, and that whole fight at the end with all the ships was torture. Because I'm trying to focus on not having to pee, and there's water everywhere. They're fighting in the ocean.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not going to make it.
What, did you have any favorite moments from this movie? Like, any favorite lines? I mean, there were so many, but, like, what really stuck out to you?
I mean, I mentioned it before, but it hit me profoundly that, Andrew Garfield saving MJ just because I don't know. I may seem like a sarcastic jerk on the outside, but I am a sucker for redemption stories.
Yeah.
I was a sucker for it. One of my favorite moment in Endgame is not any of the big moments. It's when Cap and Iron Man look at each other and Iron Man's like, "Do you trust me?" And he's like, "Yes, I do." And you're like, "They're friends again." So just that moment of Andrew Garfield redeeming himself for that was in his mind, that was his biggest failure. And that he was able to save her that time. It hit me at my core.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the best moments for me. It's hard to pick for me, but I mean, so many great one-liners, like when Tom Holland's like, it's funny. I'm just calling them by the actor names because if I just say Peter, that doesn't mean anything.
It's too confusing. Yeah,
too confusing. Which is funny, like happens in the movie. Like I was in a, it's okay. I know teamwork. I was in a team called the Avengers, and Toby's like, "That's great. That's awesome. What are the Avengers?"
That was awesome.
Just little things like that. Like I love hearing Tobey Maguire say, "What are the Avengers?"
I'm gonna turn that scene, that screenshot, into a meme. Like when you're explaining to your parents, when your parents are like, "Oh, what are you watching?" The Avengers. What's cool? What's that?
There is going to be many memeable moments.
Oh yes, I'm ready.
There is a lot. There's a lot.
The second this movie is like out on Blu-ray or streaming to the point that I can take screenshots and put in captions, I'm making like 30 memes out of it.
Yeah, a lot of potential. I also loved it. I thought it was kind of sweet when Harry Osborn's not in this at all. Neither version of Harry Osborn. But he's mentioned, Norman mentions his son, and Toby mentions like, yeah, I had a best friend. He tried to kill me, and then he died in my arms. And then Ned goes up to Peter, to Tom Holland, and says, "I promise I will not become a supervillain and try to kill you."
Maybe that's where it goes. Maybe that was foreshadowing.
I know, right? Because he's in one of the iterations, he's the Hobgoblin.
So maybe.
Did you know that? Did you know that Ned's the
I did
Hobgoblin?
not know that.
Yeah, one of the I don't know, one of the versions, Ned is the Hobgoblin. So, but yeah, a brilliant idea to go back to the first one and make Green Goblin the main villain again. I mean, yeah, like he had all the villains, but I mean, he's just so good at being evil.
I loved his more comic accurate costume too, without the green makeup, but just like the outfit, and then just Willem Dafoe. I read in an interview, they were only allowed to say this recently, where Tom Holland said that basically anytime Willem Dafoe was on set, he was really creeped out by him. He's a creepy dude.
But when you see him in interviews, he's the nicest guy. Like, he is so friendly and laid back.
Oh, he is. They did an interview with him and Alfred Molina and Jamie Foxx.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
And they're like, so how did it feel to put these costumes on once again? And Willem Dafoe's like, no one will tell you this, but they are just so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But you do it because it looks cool.
Well, and apparently he told the filmmakers, he's like, I don't want this just to be a cameo. Like, I want to have fight scenes in this. And he's 66 years old.
Oh, he does.
He's 66 years old. He did the last one in his mid-40s. And yeah, I mean, it was so cool to, of course, make the first villain the last villain, essentially.
I mean, I guess they kind of had to, because, you know, Sony and Marvel were probably scared that if they didn't include him in it, he'd be like, out, am I? I started this franchise.
You know how much I sacrificed? Yeah, it definitely, it's easy to forget because it was the first movie, but just how good he was. But just seeing him do that again in a new way, and in a scarier way, I think was just genius.
Yeah, he didn't have the mask. He could just. I still don't know how that man never got to play the Joker.
Yeah,
but this is his way.
This is his Joker.
Doing
Yeah,
that.
Yeah. Well, good stuff. Go check it out. Hopefully, you weren't spoiled by this, but I do.
If you were, go see it anyway. Go see it 3 times.
Yeah, 3 times. I do want to say, if you like what you see here, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/dorkdaily, where we have extra content, bonus footage. Check it out, because we want to make more stuff like this for you. Check out HalloweenYearRound.com. Also, Halloween Year Round on YouTube. See some of Dave's stuff. And, of course, you can check us out at dorkdaily.com or youtube.com/dorkdaily. Thank you for joining us today. I have been the older Philly film brother.
And I have been the younger, coolly Philly film brother who can get through a movie without going to the bathroom twice.
It's coming for you, man. Sooner or later.
You knew this was coming, Pete.
All right, folks. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Bye.